Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 39 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And with me, as always, is my fellow traveller in the existential field, Mr. Ken Kelly. How you doing, Ken?
I'm well, thank you, Rory. It's a great day. I'm glad to be here. We're kind of just at the back end of the initial launch of my book that has been so well received by our counselling tutor members. So I'm very grateful for that. How's things your side, Rory?
It's great, Ken, and it's great. It's a lovely day. I've already been on Facebook Live, just chatting to members of our Facebook group. And if you want to join our Facebook group, if you go to www.counsellingtutor.com, 2 L's in counselling, we spell it the UK British English way. Hit the Facebook button and you can join over 5,000 like-minded people, students, therapists, and also people who teach therapy in our wonderful group. So I've been doing a little bit of a Facebook Live this morning, a bit of an early bird, Ken. And also I've been reading a few chapters of your book and it's absolutely splendid.
Thank you. So that went out as an early launch. The hard copy is on its way and it's called Basic Counselling Skills, a Student Guide. And just join our Facebook group. You'll see it there if you're interested in that. And thank you for all the lovely feedback that has been coming in. Hundreds and hundreds of emails on feedback, Rory. It's been brilliantly received.
Lovely. Let me ask you, Ken, how do you feel about that? That's a therapeutic question. How do you feel about that?
What I feel is I'm very grateful. I'm humbled that it is received so well. And the main motivation of putting the book together in the first place was to make a difference, was to take skills which can be tricky at times, which is difficult to explain. And I wanted to write a book that has kind of audio files where people can go and listen to the skill being used and see how that's used in a simulated session and evaluate what happened in that. And it's done what it needed to do. I'm getting a lot of emails saying it's really easy to understand. I finally get it now. It all makes sense now. It means it's hitting the mark. And that's the reason I wrote the book. Certainly not to be famous, just to serve our audience. And it is doing that. So I'm absolutely overjoyed.
Fantastic. And that's what Counselling Tutor is all about, isn't it? It's about making the difficult simple, pulling the veil away, and making learning easy. Yeah,
very much so. And in the theme of servicing our audience, today we're going to be servicing you with a great episode. Episode 39, What Can You Expect? Well, we're going to kick off discussing the very first meeting that you have with a client, that very first session, how that feels, how you are before that client arrives. Now, this can either be the very, very first ever session you have as you go in as a placement counsellor, but we also have a first session with each new client who joins us. And we often speak about endings in counselling, but what about beginnings? So Rory and I thought we'd dive into that. Theory with Rory today is venturing into an area of integration, Rory. Give us a bit of a bulk out of what we can expect.
Yes, well, integration is using more than one theory, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about integration. I know a lot of students, as they come to the end of the studies, they study in a solo, a mono theory, person-centred or CBT or TA, might think, I'd like to take in another theory maybe to add a few more tools in the toolbox. That's the usual. So I'm going to discuss just a little bit about integration and tell you a little bit on my thoughts about the difference between being an integrative therapy and being an eclectic therapy. And it involves a disco, Ken. So I'll leave it there.
I love it already. And just to say again, I know you've mentioned the Facebook group, Rory, and I know that the integrative therapy is mentioned again and again in our Facebook group. It's a topic that is important to you, our listener, and that's what we do. We bring you the topics you ask for. So if you want to hear something on this podcast, ask about it in the Facebook group and we will pick that up. We're going to be closing episode 39 with how we measure the success of a client. Another question that came from the Facebook group. How can you evaluate a client's success? So a nice packed episode today. And we kick off at the beginning with that very first session. What a great place to start, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one I think that gives a lot of students the most anxiety. You know, who will this client be? How will I be in the relationship? What do I do? Will they know I'm a student? All that kind of thing. So we'll take it step by step. I think that the first thing is that any new meeting has a few kind of basic rules, and part of that is I always offer my clients a drink. Now, I did have someone say to me the other day that that some clients, if you offer clients a drink, they might swallow their emotions and hide behind the cup. And my response to that is, how big's the bloody mug? Because to be honest, there's no research anywhere that I've ever seen, and I've studied a lot, that says offering someone a drink of water or a cup of tea has any detrimental effect on the therapeutic alliance. So I think I'd just like to get off my chest, to be honest. And I know me and Ken have spoken about it. So offer them a drink, glass of water, and there can be some good medical reasons for that. Clients may come in a medical condition where they need to drink. And by offering that, you're offering, and certainly here in the UK, tea is a cultural glue, isn't it? I know people drink coffee nowadays, but in the UK, it is a cultural glue. It's a cultural norm. And I often do that. And then maybe sit down, just kind of get the pleasantries. I might say to a client, how'd you get here okay? And what I would do is, after that, having done an assessment previous, I may have spoke to someone on the phone and got a sense that we could work together. Then I go into the contract, Ken, and I think that's important. The contracting is important, but it can have a few difficulties, especially if the client may be upset.
100% right. And a client may present in that initial session and they have their material and they just want to get their material out. And I think you drive an important point there, Rory, in that we have to visit the contract before that client brings their material, and at least look over the areas where we may need to break confidentiality, where we're mandated by law, where there is legislation that we have to break confidentiality, so that the client knows what they can and can't bring, or feel safe in what they are bringing. And I want to take a step even back from that. Within my practice, I'm in private practice, and I offer an initial session, which is not counselling, and it is not paid for. And it's a 20 to 30 minute session where a client can come along and meet with me and discuss what it is that they're looking to get out of counselling and ask any questions that they may have. And it gives me an opportunity to outline what counselling is and is not. In that initial session, it's not therapy as we know it. It's not counselling. And that is made very clear at the beginning of the session, where I say I'm not going to be deep diving into your material. Would be disrespectful to you and unfair to open that up and then for you to walk out not having a therapist in place. And it gives them an opportunity to feel if I'm the right person that they might want to work with. So that's the first contact I have with a client, and I may give them my contract to take away with them, but I will still cover those limitations in confidentiality, lest they may bring something in that initial session.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think the first thing I'd like to share, as I used to share with our learners, Ken, is if you get a client who's really, really upset, you need to do the bare minimum of contracting, at the very least the limits of confidentiality. Mm-hmm. Because as soon as the client speaks about something, if you've not got a contract in place, you're in a bit of a grey area. Because if then you have to break confidentiality and the client said, well, I was never told this. Yes. It is difficult. And it can be very, very difficult to interrupt someone's process if they're upset. My view is there's something around autonomy. So unless they actually know what they're getting, then they shouldn't really be getting it, if that makes sense. You need to absolutely, the clients need to have at least a basic understanding of confidentiality. I have to say it's not happened very much in all the years I've practiced. And also, if someone's very upset, you give them time. Don't say stop crying while I fill a contract in. That's completely wrong. But maybe at a pertinent point, say, I hear you've got some difficulties, but there are some things that you need to know before we can proceed.
Oh, I like that. As you're saying that, I'm just thinking, what comes to mind is the very first words that you say to that client are really important in making it clear that this is not an open place to quickly bring your information. So if you were to sit them down in your counselling room, give them that cup of tea, Rory, and say, oh, welcome, I wonder how you're feeling today. That's an open invitation for them to blah and bring all that information. Whereas if you sat them down and gave them that cup of tea and say, while you have a small sip on that tea and just get comfortable with the room, I wonder if I can just run over a few things for you. And you take control of that right from the beginning in order to, I guess, like you say, give the client the autonomy of bringing that in. So just that wording can be really helpful.
I think so, Ken. And also, it's a bit of a conversation starter, because clients sometimes ask questions. Well, what does this mean?
Yes.
What does that mean? And I always say to them, look, take the contract away. If there's anything you're not happy with, then we'll bring it. We can talk about it next week. And when I start the second session, I just say to them, I'm aware that we contracted last week. Is there anything there that you want to bring up? And that gives them the opportunity to say, well, actually, there's this, that, and the other, because they'll have had a week to read it. And I hear where Ken's coming from. Sometimes in placement we don't have that luxury. Placement therapists don't have the luxury of having half an hour. People are just allocated, aren't they? So I think that's important. And I think the biggest thing about the initial, I've always believed this, I believe it really strongly, Ken, is that the initial interaction between the client and the counsellor it opens the stage of therapy. It's like the curtains being drawn back on a play. And if it's done properly and considered, that play, which is the client's life, will unfold in a way which is at their pace and that you will be able to interact with. If it's rushed at any level, then it won't proceed in the same way. And that's the metaphor I use, the opening of a play, Ken.
I love that. And what resonated with me, at their pace. And here's the thing, and this can happen. You're a placement counsellor, you're going in and you've studied all your skills. Boy, do you know your skills. You know about reflection, and you know about paraphrasing, and you know about focusing. And then you have a client in a first session who doesn't give you a chance, because they've got so much material. They just want to bring it and bring it and bring it and bring it, and they can leave without you saying many words at all.
Absolutely.
And that can leave you as a student counsellor feeling, am I doing my job? I didn't get in there. And it's natural in that first session for a client to just kind of bring all that information out and not give you a space there. But you are being there for them. You're doing exactly what that client needs. They need someone to hear them, to just be there. That client just needs to get that out. And there will be ample opportunity, if that client decides to come back, to delve a little deeper into that material and to work with it. But it's just that feeling that you can sometimes be left with, that I didn't say a single word. They just came in and they didn't stop talking. That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, some of the best outcomes that I've had in therapy, or clients have had, not me, clients have had, is where I felt I've done nothing. I often say to my supervisor, I did nothing. I just sat there and they worked it out for themselves. And my supervisor, who's quite wise, she said, come, Rory. She said, you did do something, didn't you? And I said, yes, I did do something. But, I guess what I'm trying to get across is, you learn all these tools, and you've got this little toolbox, skills, theories, and the client comes in their metaphorical car, and you rush with all these spanners out, and actually they just want to be heard. Get the skills out when they're needed, and just be leisurely. And I think that's a big difference, Ken, between opening a session in your training provider, your college or your training provider, and opening it in the real world.
Oh yeah.
It's really, really different.
Oh yeah, because you learn your topping and tailing, as it were, that you need for your assessments of how you open your session, and you do that when you're having your simulated skills session. And as you finish it, so the simulated client brings the material, because they know the rules of the game. When you're at college,
Yeah.
When you're out there, the client doesn't know the rules of the game. And I want to give you the flip side of the client who comes and kind of brings all this information straight up front. The flip side of that is the client who comes along and doesn't know what to say. They feel awkward. They're sat in a room with a stranger. That's what's happening here. You haven't had time to build that rapport, to build the trust, to build the relationship. They may be carrying something they've never shared with another human being before. They couldn't. Nobody was there to listen. And it can be that after you've gone through, hi, welcome, here's your cup of tea, let me speak about the contract, well, I wonder what may have brought you here today, that they give you just a little bit, a couple of sentences, and then they sit there. Now, we learn about silence being a skill of counsellors, and silence is a great skill, but it's also only a great skill when it is used appropriately. Even Carl Rogers mentions that silence can sometimes be uncomfortable for both the client and the counsellor. And silence, when a client has come to a very first session, may not be a therapeutic silence. It may be I really don't know what to say here. I don't know the rules of this. So it's about being mindful in that very first session to be there with that client where they're at, and if they don't know what to say, you can kind of, what might you say to somebody brand new, just come in and they go, I don't know how this works, I don't know what to say?
Well, yeah, that happens quite a lot, Ken, to be honest. And I just say to them, well, this is your space for you to be who you are. Yeah. So if you just be the person you want to be, and speak about what you want. And also, if a client's really struggling, I may very well say to the client, I might go down two different paths of inquiry, being curious as a skill. I might ask, how often does the client get an opportunity to talk about themselves? Mm-hmm. That's a good opener. Oh, yes. Or, I might ask them, how does this feel to talk to someone who is, by all accounts, a stranger? And I'd ask both. I might ask both those questions.
They're really worth writing down, because that is really good. And it is. Sometimes a client feels that I've never done this before. It's brand new to me. How do other people do it? I don't know the rules of engagement. And I think what you're saying there, Rory, is you make it very clear that this is their space to come as they are and present whatever they choose. And when they're given that permission, almost permission to be them, it's that threat-free environment where no matter what they bring, they're met with that unconditional positive regard, that those foundations start getting laid, those core conditions start being felt within the therapy room. And it's interesting, you can have that kind of maybe a difficult start. It can be difficult. You can feel it difficult yourself when the client leaves going, wow, that was a difficult session. But when you measure that over a number of sessions and see where that client goes to, it can be really interesting as you watch them grow and develop and give themselves that permission. When the client comes in and sits down and says, well, since last we spoke, and they're right there, that timid person who daren't speak in the first session. What a privilege it is.
Absolutely, Ken. It's awe-inspiring work, is what I would say. I'm thoroughly grateful of the clients that I have spoken to, many hundreds over the years, and I've sat and heard their stories, and it's a real privilege. And here's the thing, Ken, and this maybe we could take away as we come to the end of this segment, is that often as a therapist you'll see the client growing before they see themselves growing. Mm-hmm. It's one of those paradoxes of therapy where you may see, I'll give you an example. I'm going to make this up, so I'm not drawing from a client that I know, but you may say to a client, I've noticed that when you come in, you sit more squarely on the chair. And the client says, yeah. And and they go, yeah. And the reason for that is, and they tell you the reason, and they begin to realize what they've done. It's really magical. It really is magical. Fantastic. Isn't it, John? And all you have to do that is be thoughtful and be yourself. And I think that can be the biggest challenge of all, especially on your first time as a therapist.
And what's really wonderful is that this ties into the topic we're going to be speaking about at the end, where we how you can evaluate where a client is at, how you can see the progress that they've had. And that's kind of what you just touched on there, that sitting squarely in the chair. You can see that progress, but we'll get there and join it all up as we go to the end. But we're going to skip away from that very first session now. We're going to go into integrative therapy theory with Rory. So what can we expect to take away this week?
Well, I'm going to have a little wander down the roads of integration and talk a little bit about how there's now a kind of big thinking within counselling and psychotherapy about integrating different theories together. And I've got a lecture on this. I've done a lecture in the CSR study group on integration, where I go really deeply into it and I look at all the different positions. But I'm going to be talking about the difference between integrative psychotherapy and eclectic. And I'm going to use the metaphor of a disco to help us with that. So stay tuned.
With the lights flashing and the music playing in my ears, let's dive straight in to Theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees Oakes.
Have you ever been to a wedding disco? The sort of thing that happens after a wedding. Everybody has a few drinks. Everybody has a bit of a dance. Dances on the dance floor till the early hours. Everybody has a good time. But sometimes you're dancing away and all of a sudden the DJ changes the tune and you're left a little bit disappointed and you've just got into the rhythm of things. You're shaking your booty and all of a sudden you shuffle on back to your table, maybe muttering under your breath, I wish you'd put music on that I like. Well, yeah, it's happened to us all. And indeed, there is a connection between a wedding disco and integrative therapy, because like the DJ has a number of different genres and a number of different pieces of music with different beats and different histories. And so an integrative therapist would have a number of different therapies and theories to draw on. And I guess the connection is that, like a good DJ, they try and blend them together, and a good therapist would try and blend their different theories together so it seemed seamless to the clients. But what happens when all that goes wrong? Well, I can share from a client's perspective what that looks like. A few years ago, I had a learner who was a bit puzzled when I was talking about the different models of therapy. And eventually after class, she stayed behind and she said, "Can I ask you," she said, "about two interventions my therapist used a few years ago?" And I said, "Of course." And she said to me, "Well, one of them was I had to write a letter to someone I was having difficulty with. And I wrote the letter and then I gave the therapist the letter. And the next week she never mentioned it again. And I never mentioned it. And I never knew what that was about." And then she said the other strange thing was, at one point she gave me a A4 piece of paper with 4 clip art gravestones on, three pictures of gravestones. And she said, "I want you to write on the first gravestone what you think what will be written on your gravestone. On the second gravestone, what you would like. And on the third gravestone, what other people would write." So she did this. She obliged the therapist, wrote it down very diligently, handed it back. And again, nothing was said. And she said, "Well, what was all that about?" And quite interestingly, those two approaches are well-known therapeutic approaches if they're done properly. The first, the letter, comes from the Gestalt perspective, where you write a letter to someone that you may be having difficulty with or have someone finish business with. And what happens is that the writing of the letter can be very cathartic. And also, at the end of it, you've got a choice what you want to do with it. You can either throw it away, or you can keep it, or you can burn it. But the power is in your hands. It can be a very powerful piece of work if done thoughtfully. And also, the gravestones might sound a bit bizarre at first, but effectively, what the therapy is asking you to do is asking what you think might happen, what you want to happen, and what other people are going to tell you will happen. And at that point, you can look at the 3 positions and you can start making your own decisions. The middle gravestone would be actually what you wanted. It can be a really good way in to working with a client's own desires, own needs in the world. And, it's used a lot in training as well, but again, thoughtfully. And this is the difference between someone who's eclectic and who's just drawing things out of the air in the hope that, like the wedding DJ, people will get up on the dance floor and dance, and someone who's integrative, who's integrating 2 or more approaches. And what's really interesting is integrative therapy usually is where you have 2 therapies that are complementary. In other words, 2 therapies that join together. So I'm thinking maybe person-centered and CBT. They have a commonality in that they both deal in the here and now. Yeah. And, here and now interventions in CBT, here and now feelings in person-centered therapy. That can work very well. My friend, Catherine Nibbs, who's a researcher, her basis of her therapeutic approach is attachment and neuroscience. So attachment is how, as children, we make our view of the world and how our brain wires up. And neuroscience is how therapy can help us make new neural connections and help us rid ourselves to some extent or react differently to things that have happened in the past. Both very complementary. So there is another difference between integrative and eclectic. Eclecticism, if done properly, so eclecticism isn't a bad thing per se, can be where someone is grounded in one therapy, say person-centered, and then steps out of it to do, say, 2 chairs work in Gestalt, or maybe some other kind of intervention, like ask about an activating event, which would be CBT. So they can work together, but the danger is if it's done without thought or without care or without blend, you might end up like the wedding disco DJ who has an empty dance floor and a lot of upset and not very satisfied people. It needs to be done thoughtfully. So to help you with that, I've actually produced a handout. So if you go to our mother website, which is www.counsellingtutor.com, and go into the podcast and go into episode 39. And just remember, there's 2 L's in counselling. We spell it the UK British way. And just go into episode 39, click on it, and you can download the advantages and disadvantages of integrative approaches. It's going to be a great help if that question ever comes up on your assignments.
Thank you as always, Rory. Really insightful. And it's interesting when you were speaking about integrative and eclectic. There's a big difference there, and the same is true at a disco. If they start playing one kind of heavy metal rock, and then the next one's a ballad, and then the next one's a country and western, you just get confused, don't you? I think I might have been to a disco or 2 like that. But you've got a handout, and you're going to want to get this, and to get Rory's handout, and if you've got any of Rory's handouts, you're going to know the value of that, specifically when it comes to assignment time. You just go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab. That'll give you a list of all our podcasts. You want to go to episode 39, right at the top, you'll be able to click and download Rory's handout from this episode.
Yeah, and yeah, with that disco music still pulsating in our ears, yes. We're moving on to our next topic, which is becoming, I think, more and more asked for students, and that is evaluation, Ken.
It is, and we're talking about the evaluation specifically of a client and how we can see the improvement maybe that they have had from coming into counselling. What do we look for? And it's tricky. And I'm a person-centred counsellor. So a person-centred counsellor, I would be less likely to do a questionnaire when somebody comes in saying, out of 1 to 10, where do you rate yourself? And then to ask them again midway, and then maybe to ask them at the end. So I'd be less likely to do that. And then there's maybe a school of thinking that says, well, then how can a person-centered counsellor evaluate where a client is at? And for me, Rory, I ask them.
Really?
Yes.
Ask them.
I ask them. And I get it from the client's frame of reference. They say where they're at. If you say, we're at now our 8th session, and I wonder how this has been for you and where you find yourself from where you came in. And they tell me, and that's how I base the evaluation.
Yeah, so what Ken's talking about is qualitative evaluation technique, where you ask the clients. And I think, in fact, someone only the other day phoned me up and said, how do you set this up in a practice? Because the practice this person was working in they've been asked specifically to measure and have some key performance indicators. And, if you're working in a charity, or if you're working maybe for the National Health Service, you'll have key performance indicators. And those key performance indicators are things like how many do not attends, how many sessions did clients attend over the whole, how many people didn't attend initially. And you can use those as a measure of effectiveness. And, I helped run a practice for a long time. And one of the things we looked at management meetings was that, some therapists, their clients came for all the sessions, and some, DNA'd after one session. And it kind of stands out, if the service is being run and every other therapist is having long engagements with clients and one therapist isn't, then I think, that might indicate, and Roger said, the facts are always friendly, to take that therapist to one side and say, we're just wondering, what this is. It may be that they're just unlucky. They've been allocated clients that, they're just not proceeded. But it might be that there's something fundamentally wrong. And also it links into funding. I mean, let's not make any bones about it. In the UK at the moment, all anybody talks about in healthcare is money. And nowadays you have to justify your funding, and by using an assessment tool, you could justify for the people who fund, whether you're offering that dreaded value for money, which is always been. No, I don't think anybody quite knows what value for money is. I think it's just something on a management tick list, personally, but that's me being controversial. But yeah. Yeah, it's a Saturday. It's this is the value for money, but also it has a real function, I think, where if you're doing you should be doing 6 week reviews, maybe a review at 12 weeks if it's a 12-week interaction, and you can, by reviewing, you get the client to actually discuss what's change for them. And I think that's really useful. I've always believed that. Even when I was a student, I always thought that's really useful, because clients come along and say, well, this is changed and that's changed. And it adds to this virtuous circle of recovery and feeling better. And it may be you ask them and they think, no, I'm still the same, which again is helpful, because it might be that as a therapist, we think, I wonder if this modality is working and maybe we need to do a referral. So it all links into ethical practice. And there's different ways of doing that. You can use a GAD scale. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to include a GAD scale in the downloads. So you can pick a GAD scale up. One word of warning. What I would say is, don't just use them without any training. Find someone who uses one and ask how it works. But this is just an example of how evaluative tools work. And I'm going to develop my own little GAD scale. And a GAD scale basically is anxiety, health, and depression. It's a gauge of how people feel, and you can do a little tally up at the bottom. But that's the modern world of placement counsellors now. Certainly in the NHS, and certainly in some charities where they're having to justify funding.
It is. It's what you're speaking about really is measurement, and it's really difficult to measure something like the effectiveness of counselling, because it's metaphysical, isn't it? You can't measure it. You can't take a special ruler and measure the difference that has been made. So you need to ask the client so that they can self-report how it's been for them. You're speaking about funding, and the way that it's gone in the UK, and it has been for some time now, it is called outcome-based funding. So funding is often only paid if certain outcomes are hit. And there is I noticed as you were sharing about the funding and the measurement of that, Rory, that there was it seemed like a bit of a sticking point there, and I get that too, because very often if your agency is kept alive, which many are, by outcomes-based funding, if you're not showing the outcomes, then you're not getting the funding and you're not able to give the service to the clients. So too often the figures that are shown kind of don't really reflect what's going on at the front line in the service.
Absolutely.
But that is, but we do the best that we can, and we do what we have to do to be able to keep on being there for the clients. So I guess it swings and roundabouts at the end of the day. And you were speaking, Rory, about the assessment up front, and I mentioned person-centered therapist. Myself maybe wouldn't be so inclined to do an assessment up front. But in a way I am. Of course I am. I'm asking them what they might want out of therapy. I'm just and I worked for some time more an NHS kind of setting where I did work with assessments. And what I found really interesting with the review, and you mentioned the review of the client being able to recognise the distance they've travelled, the journey they've had, and you can kind of see it's a way of focusing down on the wins that they've had and reinforcing the positivity that they're gaining and the growth that they're gaining. But similarly, you mentioned a client may say, well, I just feel exactly where I was when I came in. A client may say, I feel worse than I did when I came in. And that review is there for the client, but it's also there for us as a therapist, for us to review how are we working with this client? Is that effective? Is this in the best service of that client? And you were speaking, Rory, just a few moments ago in Theory with Rory about integrative therapy. Are we using what is the best fit for that client where they are at this moment? And those reviews can show that to us. And a review is not just to see where the client's at, it's to see where we are at as counsellors as well.
It does. And it also protects us from things like, it protects the client from things like dependency, from transferential issues, where the client is linked into dependency, where the client is coming to see you because they see you as something else. They're coming for something other than therapy. And I can remember many years ago, a client coming to me, and clearly there was no therapeutic work taking place. And I said, I'm kind of aware that, you come, but it's kind of conversational, and I'm just wondering what you want from therapy. So a bit of a challenge. And she said, well, I just want to sit with you because you're a nice man. And, at that point, I had to kind of think very, very deeply about, well, is this client coming for therapy or for something else? And, we resolved that in a way that was all right for the client, but also was ethical, because quite clearly, if someone's coming for something other than therapy, it can not be a good thing. Dependency isn't a good thing. And that is why we review. We review just to make sure our clients are getting what they came for.
Very much so. And it can really be helpful for the client as well if they have filled in some kind of a form, outlining their mood and how they are and their general well-being on a scale maybe of 1 to 5. There are such forms available, and they maybe do that at the end of their therapeutic journey. They can kind of compare for themselves and go, wow, I actually got something out of this, and kind of see some movement within themselves. So very, very useful. And what you were saying there, Rory, so important. If we're doing that review and there isn't any movement, it could also be an indicator of something underlying. There could be a chemical imbalance within the brain that no matter how much you counsel is not going to go away. It could need additional referrals and further treatment, and it's an indicator that can kind of highlight that, bring it up for us and show us. Interesting topic, and I'd love if this topic could go on some more on our Facebook group, Counselling Tutor. Go on Facebook, look for that, go to our group, come and join the over 5,000 fellow like-minded students, tutors, and people interested in counselling from around the world, and get that topic going, because it's certainly of interest.
Yeah, we'd love to see you in the Facebook group, and we love the discussions. Ken and myself love to see the real rich discussions that are going on. People who in any other circumstance may never have met each other. That's the wonderful thing about social media. The fact that, in the past, you'd just be in your groups, you may meet people in your practices or in your kind of wider social circle. But, the social media allows people to come together in a group and talk about all things counselling and psychotherapy related. It's fantastic, and it's great discussion. So if you're not in the Counselling Tutor Facebook group, I think you're missing out.
I agree with you. The nice thing is, the group is not our group. It's your group. It really is your group, and it is propelled by your momentum. As this is your podcast, episode 39, kicked off with that first session. How do we present? What do we look for in the client? We went into integrative therapy in Theory with Rory, and of course, we just ended with talking about how we might look to evaluate the success a client is or maybe is not having in the therapy room. As we come to the end of episode 39, I'm grateful to have been here. Don't forget to go to the website, counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcasts tab, go to episode 39, get Rory's 2 handouts and download those and put them in your file.
And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.